All right. Generally, when we do streams and whatnot, I usually go over like the topic that we'll be discussing in a video. So I wanted to go ahead and get this released before we did that particular stream. Most of you guys are going to be watching this at a later date and it's still going to be relevant. Okay. There's a myth that seems to float around where a criticism of something that is female led, and it's not even exclusive to like female led, but certainly for the sake of this video, let's try to focus on that. But if it's a female led thing and it comes with criticism from people, the folks that are trying to save it, protect it, sometimes that's Access Media, sometimes it's just regular fans. They come up with this sort of idea, narrative, if you will, in which they basically suggest that your issue with it stems from your issues with having something be fronted by a female. And that's complete and utter nonsense. And I just wanted to do this video to reiterate this. That's generally not ever the case. Most criticisms are not, that's not the case. Most folks don't lead with that. Or there may be some outliers that may generally just despise something that is led by a female, possibly. You always have to leave room for outliers on any given subject. But to act as if that is just the norm, the lead criticism, is complete nonsense. We've talked about The Last of Us a lot on this channel, but this isn't anything that started with The Last of Us. Where it comes with criticism, it happens in movies, it happens in games, but it's more, I would say more often movies for sure. Where it just happens to be a female front. Some people have issues with it, and then everybody that dislikes it is apparently an incel and hates strong female leads. It just doesn't make sense. Now, when you talk about gaming, you know, I grew up on a PlayStation. PlayStation was my first system after the Sega Genesis. I'm a young guy. I'm only 30 years old. So my first system was the Sega Genesis. After that, the next system that I actually owned was a PlayStation. So Tomb Raider was my jam. Right? It was by default. Had no issues with it. Resident Evil, you've heard me say on this channel, is my favorite franchise. This is what it is. My main on Injustice, as an example, is Supergirl. I have tons of female characters on my wall. Storm being one of my favorite characters. We have Wonder Woman over there. We have Misty up there. To sit here and just, you know, Catwoman's right there as well. To sit as if, and people have told me this, which is crazy because I'm a comic book guy. And I've read and raved about a lot of comic book characters on this channel. And for someone to just respond to some criticism that I have, and even if the criticism doesn't even mention, like Last of Us, for example, I don't even like, I never dwell on the fact that there's female leading. That never was my leading argument, never. But they need things to be true. And that's unfortunately what's happened with a lot of different things that exist. This is why I'm saying it's not anything that's exclusive to female characters. You can look at a lot of different groups and people act as if the criticism added is aimed at the fact that that type of person leads the deal. They try to basically, it's the narrative is that, well, it's not a straight white person, white male, therefore you have an issue with it, which is just, it's just nonsense. It's just nonsense. It's just a lazy non-argument, but that's how people deal with criticism nowadays. It's that you are attacking the type of person that is. And that's not to mean that sometimes, and I want to be very clear about this, absolutely, sometimes you can come up with a female-led book or movie or game or something, and you're beating the reader, the audience, the consumer over the head with that particular fact. Yeah, people have every right to criticism, but it's not in the mere fact that it doesn't come with the fact, well, that's a female or that's a gay person in some cases or something like that. Like, that's just not what it is. Lazy criticism of critics, basically, is lazy criticism of criticism that I think is often legit. Like I said, I'm not going to sit up here and pretend like there aren't people that may reach like that, but I think that's a very minor group of people in terms of their influence and impact in the people that are making these said arguments, right? But it's just baffling when I hear it. So, I don't want to say so often, but generally when I criticize something that is led by females, it's, well, you have an issue with female characters. It's just nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. It's not true. It's not true or anything like that. I've criticized, and this is what I've said about, for example, this is the benefit that white male straight characters have, in that they can be criticized and it's never about that, right? People can be on opposite ends of it. People can dislike it. People can like it, but it's generally because it's good, generally because it's bad. We aren't really like, well, it's a white straight person, therefore that's the case. But you don't offer that same criticism, that same standard, which is it's a high key racism or bigotry in some cases, because what you do is you don't criticize them, or more so, you don't hold them to the same standard, is what I mean. You look at them as if they have a handicap. So you don't criticize them fairly. Like if they're a woman or something like that, versus, okay, yeah, it's nothing. Like, we criticize things that have straight white guys all the time. And I'm like, this is absolute garbage. And then it's like, oh, well, yeah, it just happens to be absolute garbage. It isn't until I criticize something with a female or something like that, and they're like, oh, well, you hate women, you're an incel, some stupid, nonsensical, non-argument that is. And it's like, see what I mean? You're not actually, you don't hold them to the same standard. It's fair game on one side. On the other side, it's just like overprotection. They don't, and it also goes to the storytelling too, because like I've mentioned earlier, there are lazy stories that try to beat you over the head with the character's sexuality or something like that. That's generally what you see sometimes, as well as, the fact that they have to reiterate the fact that she is a woman and they are going to Mary Sue her in that aspect. And it's just one of those things where you can have almost form a legit criticism against that when they lead with it. And they do beat you over the head with the fact that person is whatever sexuality and that person is of whatever gender. But that also speaks to the weakness of the writers, directors, creative people that are involved. Because, like I've mentioned with comic books, a lot of the white straight characters that stick around, they're not just sticking around because they're white and straight. It's because there's no social ill to fall back on. Therefore, what it forces the writers to do is to make the most creative story that they possibly can make. There's no social ill to fall back on. They just have to be as creative as possible. And you can think about the vast numbers of white characters, straight white characters that just have not worked out, the trial, error, it failed, so forth. But when you think about some of these classic characters, yes, some of them they have the benefit of like first use, right? As in they have been around for so long. The Batmans and the Supermans of the world. But that's not to be said about every single character. The issue with, and I know I'm speaking more so to the comic books, the issue with that is that it was like with some of these, like, let's say non-straight white characters, is that the writers feel like they have to overcompensate for that. So they have these predictable narratives where the black person has to struggle with race, the woman has to struggle with her femininity, or not even that, just being a woman or something like that. The guy that is gay or the person that is lesbian has to go against bigotry and all. It's the same. It's so predictable, and they lead with that. And that has every right to be criticized. But that in itself, people get it mixed up, and it's frustrating. But people get it mixed up because they look at that criticism, which is a fair criticism, and saying that, hey, you're beating us over the head with this. This is very lazy. This is a very predictable narrative. But instead of taking that for what it is, you have to turn it and say, well, you have an issue because that person is a woman, and that's not the case. There are like when the Captain Marvel thing happened. You had the Alita movie, and nobody had an issue with one, but they had a lot of issues with the others. But Captain Marvel to me had been the overprotected movie that I'd ever seen in my lifetime. I had seen nothing like that. But that's what happens. And that you had those movies even be around around the similar time, and people were like, "Yeah, one's good, the others that has some issues." And if you had issues with the Captain Marvel joint, it's because you had an issue with this being a female-led film, and it's like that's not the case. Okay, no matter how much you want to pretend, that is not the case. I've said this and I've made this point over the course of the last week. People make up invisible enemies, and they make up invisible arguments that nobody's really making. But in order for their argument to be valid, they have to pretend that you are making that argument. So they'll go down all the way with that, no matter if it makes any sense. Like I said, I have people in the comment section of my videos, recent videos, saying, well, you have an issue with this particular game because there's a female lead in it or something like that. And I'm like, I didn't even mention like that at all being a point of emphasis in this video. Why did you bring that up? This is why I think calling these types NPCs is a very valid argument. Or not even an argument, a very valid claim, because these guys make the same arguments, and it's almost like they've been pumped out by a machines being pumped out by a machine. Most people don't have issues with female characters. That's just what it is. Sometimes your female characters suck, and we can criticize them. And if you actually want to see some sort of forward momentum for the female character, then you would treat them like you would, in some capacity, straight white characters. And that is, when we criticize them, it's generally not assume that we have an issue with the character because they're straight and white.